Good morning. Greetings to all of you. If I don't know you, my name is Eugene. I have the privilege of serving here as lead pastor. And today I bring God's word to you. To those who are in the chapel, blessings on you. God bless you. Good to be seen by you. And likewise to those online. If you haven't been journeying with us, I'll tell you we're in the book of Joshua. So you can turn there now to Joshua chapter 5. And we answer the question, what's next? What's next? The Israelites have traveled a long way over many, many years, decades actually, 40, find themselves on the River Jordan. And last week, we spent time talking about how they crossed over the river and the significance of that. And that finally, promise had become provision. It was a reality. The people who for so long had been promised a place now were in the promised land. And as they cross over, it is done with miraculous works, and this has a profound impact on the people of the land. So verse 1 of chapter 5 tells us how the Canaanites respond. As soon as all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the people of Israel, until they had crossed over, their hearts melted, and there was no longer any spirit in them because of the people of Israel. Well, I mean, that's an expected response, isn't it? God does something that dramatic, and he holds back water, and the hordes, the host of Israel, cross over on dry ground. That would make me a little unnerved too. You're not just dealing with a large population carrying weapons, but rather you're dealing with them and their God seems intent on helping them. They'd be afraid. I'd be afraid. And if I were a military man, which I'm not, I would look at this as a real opportunity to strike and move fast. Because if your people are motivated and your opponents are dispirited, that's an advantage you want to press. You want to take advantage of the fact that these people have no heart. They've lost all their motivation. Now is when you strike. And yet that's not what Israel does. In fact, they set up camp. And they camp not for a day or two or even a week, but for weeks. And from a very practical standpoint, it's a horribly squandered opportunity. This is an opportunity where you can take advantage of the circumstances and really make ground, and yet they let it go. And I think we can relate to that because all of us fear squandered opportunities. You may have heard of actors who have foregone roles. It was a great role, and they said, no, not for me. And of course, it was a career-defining role. Or there might be a businessman who looks in investments and lets one go and then later looks at how it changed the world. And if only they had taken advantage in that moment, they would have done so well. The most reliable to share this story, of course, are fishermen, because they're always quick to tell you about the big one that got away. Yeah, it was this big. It was huge. With this opportunity, I had it, and I squandered it. I didn't get the hook set, and I just let the fundamentals go, and so did the fish. The big one got away. You know Moby Dick, the story? That's a story of the big one that didn't get away. And what happened? This great legendary whale, this white whale, bigger than anything anybody had seen, and this group of whalers go out, they're going to get Moby Dick, and he kills them all. The big one doesn't get away. And all but one man who floats away on a coffin, ironically, they all go to their death in the deep. Sometimes, missed opportunities are God's graces. Sometimes standing still is the most profitable thing to do. Spurgeon put it this way. He said that, yes, while the days are evil and we need to steward our time, yet God in his eternity sometimes anoints delays which are far better than our hurries. He appoints his delays that are far better than our hurries. And in our hectic, fast-paced life that keeps telling us, don't let any opportunity slip through your fingers, don't miss this occasion, sometimes we need to set up camp and do things that are far more important. And that's what we're going to see in this chapter. There are three things that happen here that seem disconnected almost, but they're not. And they are more needful and more impactful than chasing into battle. So let's look at the first, from verse 2. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel a second time." So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeath Harloth. And if you want to look it up in the footnotes, you'll get the name of that town. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them, all the males of the people who came out of Egypt, all the men of war who died in the wilderness on their way after they'd come out of Egypt. Though all the people who'd come out had been circumcised, yet all the people who were born on the way in the wilderness after they'd come out of Egypt had not been circumcised, for the people of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness, until all the nation, the men of war who came out of Egypt, perish, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord. The Lord swore to them that he would not let them see the land that the Lord had sworn to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So it was their children, whom he raised up in their place, that Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised, because they had not been circumcised on the way. When the circumcising of the whole nation was finished, they remained in their place in the camp until they were healed. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I've rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." And so the name of that place is called Gilgal to this day. Now, I counted in 6 verses. Circumcision is mentioned 9 times. I think it's about circumcision. Now, 9 times, some of you won't say the word circumcision 9 times in your entire life. It'll be a private conversation for some ladies with their husbands and their pediatrician on the birth of their child. Should we? Yes, okay, we'll do it. We'll circumcise the boy, and that'll be it. We won't speak about it anymore. It's a private medical conversation. Evidently, the Israelites don't treat it that way. It's not a medical procedure. Yes, it is physically a medical procedure, but it has other significance, and it's certainly not private. This is a public thing. This is a collective thing. Circumcision was the mark of the covenant. It was a way of showing that you belonged to these people. And it was something that was prescribed and required by God for his people. It was a commandment given to Moses. Moses did it with the people who came out of Israel. They were circumcised. But now we learn that for 40 years, no one else got circumcised. Why? We don't know. But they didn't. And now they crossed the river, and God says, it's time for you to do this. I'm thinking we could have done it on the other side, where we weren't in enemy territory. But no, once they're in enemy territory, that's when we decide to have this medical procedure that leaves all the fighting men vulnerable. It makes no sense to the modern mind. But for us, we look at it as a private medical procedure. It's not. It's an identity marker. And when we say identity, suddenly all kinds of information flows through the fore because we have perceived ideas about our identity. So let's talk about that. Back in the 30s was the first time scholars really started thinking about identity. And a guy by the name of Mead, George Mead, said that it's pretty straightforward. Society shapes self, and self shapes behavior. It's cause and effect. Society, we're talking about parenting, schools, institutions, all of those mold and shape a person's sense of self. And once you have a sense of self, who I am, that informs how you behave. Society shapes self, shapes behavior. Fairly straightforward. Nobody would really quibble with that. That's descriptive. It matches everybody's experience until the 80s. And in the 80s, suddenly there was this notion that self is not something to be shaped, but to be platformed. Not something you mold, but that you reveal. That your sense of self and identity is unique, it is set, and society is not so much a mold, but a prison. The task is not to let society shape the individual, but to escape the impinging society so that your sense of self can be revealed. It was an altogether new notion, and it has rapidly, very rapidly, become mainstream. So when people are talking about self, what they're saying is, this is who I truly am inside, and I need to shatter the chains that keep it hidden. Identity is something that society prejudices against and imposes upon. While that has certainly gained very, very strong prominence, it's very alien to the biblical portrayal. Because the biblical portrayal is that society, God's society, is given to the individual to shape the individual so that they behave in a God-honoring way. See, identity and self is a relational content. I am who I am by virtue of whom I'm associated with. And that's why it's so important that they associate rightly. I need to associate with Israel so that when you see me, you don't see an individual, but you see a nation, a people called by God. And ironically, this is going to happen regardless. We're going to determine self based on society. Identity is always attached to association. Even while in this modern era, we keep insisting that I am my own person, unattached by any kind of social constructs. That's not how we function. We always identify with the group, my people. Well, teenagers do this all the time, right? So you see teenagers and their way they dress, and it might be a little bizarre, right? Skinny jeans, big jeans, no hair, lots of hair, right? It varies. And you go, why are you looking this way? And they go, I need to be true to myself. And you're thinking, and look like 300,000 other teenagers, right? Because that's how we function. We find a subset, a group, that we feel some kinship, and these identity markers are a way of communicating that we're with them. These are my people, and these are my values. And we're going to do that, which is why it is so important for the people of Israel here to demarcate who they are, because otherwise they're going to associate with the wrong groups. They're now in enemy territory. And the greatest danger is not the fortifications. It's not the weapons or the gifted soldiers. The greatest danger is assimilating in the culture, is slowly taking on identity markers so that they become indistinguishable from the Canaanites. And sadly, that's exactly what happens. It's exactly what happens. If you get through the book of Joshua and start reading the book of Judges, it is the most depraved, tragic story of the people of God who are set apart, there to declare the holiness of the Lord. They gradually, incrementally, generation by generation, become indistinguishable from the Canaanites. It is the Canaanization of Israel. Because association shapes self. Society shapes self, which determines behavior. But here, right early, in this faithful generation, they're told the most needful thing for you to do in this situation is not to press your advantage, but to remind yourselves who you are and with whom you stand. You know, in the New Testament, this is given to us as a command as well. Right? Circumcision is no longer the covenant mark, but there is a covenant mark. It's baptism. Baptism is a public demonstration. Baptism fulfills the role of circumcision as the covenant mark of loyalty, where I say, I'm dying to my own sin and my own sense of independence. I'm dying in Christ and I'm being resurrected with Christ. And I'm doing it in the church, amongst the believers, because I am communicating I am with Christ. And if He's the head of the church, I'm now a member with the church, in the church. It's a sense of community. If you've never been baptized, it's the easiest act of obedience you'll ever get to do. It is a command and you need to obey. Let's look at the next thing they do. Verse 10. While the people of Israel were encamped in Gilgal, they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month in the evening on the plains of Jericho. And the day after Passover, on that very day, they ate of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. And the manna ceased the day after they ate of the produce of the grain. And there was no longer manna for the people of Israel, but they ate the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. So they have Passover. It's a Jewish term. I think many of you may be familiar. If not, it commemorates the Exodus period where the people were imprisoned 40 years previously. They were in Egypt, an entire nation enslaved. And there they were forced to do the brunt work, the really heavy work of Pharaoh. It was a terrible circumstance. They cry out to God for deliverance. God sends Moses. There are 10 plagues. The people are released when the angel of death crosses over and passes by the Israelites. They are rescued from death. But the firstborn of every other household dies. And because of this, Pharaoh relents and lets them go, and they are free. The Passover speaks of two things: deliverance from slavery and deliverance from death. The Passover, they passed over by the angel of death, and they're released into freedom. This is what the Passover represents. It's incredibly important to them. It is only at this point celebrated 3 times. It's celebrated as they leave, they're experiencing the Passover. They do it once more at Sinai, where Moses receives the law. And in 40 years, they don't have it again. And there's numerous reasons for it and speculation. But now they're in the promised land, they stop and they celebrate Passover again. In effect, it's a worship service. It's a really long worship service. Now, we'll be here for about an hour today. Passover takes 7 to 14 days. It's a long time. Now, again, you're talking about people who've just recovered from circumcision. They have this prime opportunity to press the advantage, and they stop for a prolonged worship service. And we know that they do it on the 14th day of the month. Previously, we learned that they crossed the river on the first day of the month. This is 2 weeks of being stationary. They decide, now we're going to worship. What a waste of time. Marva Dawn, who wrote a very good book on worship, called it a royal waste of time. And I think that's a fantastic description. Because if you're looking at worship from a very secular manner, it is a waste of time. We're not accomplishing anything. It's what, maybe 600 people in here? maybe a few more. That's a 600 human man-hours invested in this endeavor. And in that time, you're not doing anything productive, not helping the economy in any way. If we just put you out there on lawnmowers, we could mow 600 football fields in this time. I mean, there is things that you could do with this time given, and it is yet given up to nothing productive. And some people have that opinion of church and worship, and they'll say, Eugene, I don't have to go to church to be a good person. I've heard this, and you may have as well. Two things. This person has no earthly idea what it means to be a good person, because there's nobody who is good but God. And so they're measuring with a broken ruler, first of all. And secondly, they don't know what church is for. That's the big one. Look, I hope when you come to worship, it's inspiring. And as you hear the band go through the various set songs, your heart swells and you're motivated in your faith. I hope that happens. That ought to happen. I hope that through the preaching and teaching, you learn something. And you're informed as to how to conduct yourself in such a way that you're able to grow in sanctification. In other words, you become more holy. I hope that happens. That should happen. But that's not what this is primarily about. Worship is for God. We're not here so that we can invest a man-hour for some result. No, what we're doing is sacrificing our time, our attention, our affection, our voices, our money to proclaim the goodness and greatness of God because He's worth it. That's what we're doing here. We're coming not so that we might receive, which I hope you do, but that you might sacrifice, proclaim, and give. It is the thing we're made for. It is the most pressing endeavor. And of course, the irony is, the more we give worship, the more all that other stuff happens. The more we proclaim His magnificence, all the more do we experience His grace. I don't know why you came to church this morning, but I can tell you what church is for. It's for Him. And yes, it is a waste of time from an earthly perspective, but it is a royal waste of time because it is given to the King. It is for Him and His greatness. And in this moment, Israel is reminded that the best thing to do, the most pressing thing to do, is to give time in worship. And so they do that. With the conclusion of Passover, the commander of the Lord's army is encountered. This is somewhat of a mysterious passage from verse 13 onwards. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Who is this individual, the commander of the army of the Lord? There is some discussion about it. Is it an angel? There's reason to say yes, but there's some questions because this angel acts differently from most often. Normally, when an angel presents themselves, it's terrifying. People in awe fall down and worship, to which the angel is quick to say, "Let's have none of that. I'm just an angel, right? not God. Here, he says, no, you need to take your shoes off. This place is holy. Somewhat reminiscent, isn't it? If you remember earlier, the Genesis story when Moses encounters God in the burning bush, what's the instruction? Take your sandals off, for this place is holy. And so you have a commander of the Lord's army. This commander has a sword that is drawn, and there's so many things that point to Christ. You get to Revelation, and who do we see there? But the Lord of hosts, who rides into battle and commands the hosts of heaven, none other than Christ himself. We have a willingness to accept worship. The fact that he is calling him to act in the same manner as in Moses. Many look at this and say it's a pre-incarnate display of Christ. That's believable. I'm persuaded. Some would say no, it is rather a representative of the Lord, an angelic one. Nevertheless, it doesn't really matter where you land on this. But where you should land is on your knees. Because here we have someone who represents God himself. And he stands with a sword in his hand. Now that's a menacing sight. And it's explicit that it's a drawn sword. It's not like he's standing, he's got a big sword, it's on his waist. That's not the case. He's standing ready for battle. It's a military posture. And then here's the comedy. Right? Joshua asks the question we always ask. So are you for us or are you for them? We ask this all the time. Ever more since our culture has fragmented. I remember politically when I first came to the States, there were conservatives and there were liberals. Right? And I just thought these are two groups. You are either a conservative, and if so, you have these values and these opinions, or you're a liberal, and you have these values and these opinions, and there shall the two mix. Well, in the last 10 years, that's totally fragmented. I mean, you still have left and right, but on the left, you've got everything from moderates all the way through socialists. You've got Antifa on the far left, and they're squabbling with each other. And then on the right, you've got neocons, you've got populists, you've got nationalists, you've got all the way up to the Proud Boys on the far end. And they're squabbling with each other. And so it used to be, well, I'm on this side of the equation, or I'm on that side of the equation. It's pretty straightforward who's with me and who's against me. But that's not the case anymore. Now everything's fragmented, and there's all these litmus tests out there that we're constantly, what's your view on vaccines? Or how do you think we should handle masks? And the list just goes on, and we're constantly asking the question, are you with me or are you with them? And so Joshua asks the question, are you with us or are you with them? And the brilliance in this is the comedy, the answer is no. No. Wrong question. I'm the commander of the Lord's army. That's a profound thing to grapple with this morning. Are you with us or are you with them? We all want God to be with us. You know what was on the Nazis' belt buckle? God with us. Everybody wants to claim that God's on their side. The real question is, are we on his side? Is God for us? I'll tell you what, yes, God's for you. God is forever for you. God is pro you. But God's not on your side. We're supposed to be on his side. And as we navigate through these days, I think we would do far better interacting with our neighbor, remembering that the question isn't who's on my side, but whose side am I on? And the greatest demarcation, the greatest identity I have is that I'm on the side of God. And I'm not saying we should just all get along together. I'm not pretending that there's going to be the absence of conflict. After all, the commander is standing with a sword. We're going into battle. There's going to be a fight here. But it's not for Joshua. It's not for Israel. The stakes are much bigger. This is a cosmic conflict. Light versus dark. Good versus bad. Righteousness against evil. And the question is, are we going to be on the right side? Here they are at this opportune moment. They're in this key time where everything beyond, everything on that side of the equation, the enemy is dispersed. They've lost any sense of fight. And God says, all right, it's time to camp. Before you take another step, let's remember a few things. First of all, who are you? Secondly, what are you here for? And then thirdly, and this is the most important question, who am I? Who are you? What are you here for? And who am I? And so fortunately, Joshua and the people of Israel in this moment, this is rare for Israel, it's rare for us, but in this moment they get it right. They do all the right things. They just slow way down and they go, we're Israelites, we're the people of the covenant. We're a people set apart for the purposes of God. And we're here to worship and make famous the name of Yahweh our Lord. And you command us. You are the commander. You are the Lord. Can I go back just to verse 9? This is not how the chapter concludes, but it's how I will. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. And so the name of the place is called Gilgal to this day. Gilgal means rolled back. The reproach of Egypt, the shame, the humiliation, the despair, all of that has been rolled back. How's it been rolled back? Well, by God. God rolled it back. But also by the acts of Israel in their faithfulness. Every time they take a step of obedience, there is a greater distance between them and their past sins. God's forgiven them, all right? So they're not saved by their deeds. They're made righteous by something God has done, but in their deeds, they delight in it. It's like new shoes, right? I like shoes. I like buying shoes for my family. I'm a shoe guy. When my kids get new shoes, good-looking shoes, I bought them. But the way they walk in those new shoes, that's them. When they walk with that prideful strut, because their feet are shod well, that's them. God does the work, but when we're blameless, the way we walk it out is different. And here's the beautiful thing. As that happens time and again, Egypt falls further and further behind. You know, you may be in a situation right now where you feel like this is the doldrums. We're just not moving. I'm not gaining any ground. I just seem to be treading water here. I want to encourage you that you may be camped and you may not feel like you're pressing the advantage, but every act of obedience is putting more and more distance between you and that past. You're making progress in every obedient decision, even if you don't feel like you're moving. So today, let's make one more, and we'll pray together. Maybe this morning this is your need. Perhaps you've been living a life in total rebellion and disobedience to the Lord. My encouragement to you is today, let this be your first step of righteousness. Identify with Christ by faith. Choose to trust in him. Repent of your sin and say, God, will you save me? And he will make you his own. He will take you from an enemy and make you into a daughter or a son. And if that's what you want to do, please do it here in the quiet of your heart. And then after the service, speak with me, speak with someone at the Connect counter. We'd love to guide you as you take further steps of obedience. And for you this morning, fellowship, if you've been taking steps that seem somewhat provincial, nothing dramatic, and you're wondering, when is the next grand encounter? May I just encourage you? That's in the basic steps, remembering who you are, remembering why you're here, and remembering who he is. It's through that progress is found. And Lord, we thank you for all these things, for your mercy that is new.